Okay. The last time I was talking to you, I mentioned that there was a period in Roman history where we had five good emperors. And one of the reasons they were good was that each one of them selected his successor based on that person's skills and the likelihood that he would be doing a good job running the empire. But that run of good emperors was brought to an end by the fifth of the five good emperors, Marcus Aurelius, who was in general a very good emperor and a very smart man, but he did the dumb thing of appointing his own son, Commodus, to be his natural successor. And Commodus turned out to be a very bad emperor. Not only that, but he was the beginning of a run of bad or incompetent emperors, or people who could at least not handle the situation, to the point that in the 3rd century, from 235 to 285, we have this period of 50 years with 26 different emperors. And a lot of them are assassinated or commit suicide. So this is not a good period for the Roman Empire. In fact, it's called the crisis of the 3rd century. And the person who pulled the empire out of its crisis, at least temporarily, was a man named Diocletian. Diocletian's one of those people that you sort of got to feel sorry for, because he was in many ways a good emperor, but the things he was doing were coming probably too late. They were too little too late to fix the problems that the empire was having. One of the problems that had been going on in the 3rd century was that the money which was used in that time was all gold and silver coins. And they were valuable on the basis of the value of gold and silver. So the more gold you were able to hand out, the more you were able to buy. But a lot of Roman emperors decided that they could make more money. Literally, they could coin more coins by mixing the gold with other stuff that wasn't so expensive. And this meant that although technically the coins were still of the same denomination, they weren't worth as much because they didn't have as much gold in them. So when you were going to buy something, the price would be 3 gold pieces, and the merchant would say, "Yeah, but that's not really gold you're giving me. That's gold mixed with something else. So I'm going to charge you 4 of those supposedly gold pieces." And this is what you call inflation. I mean, the prices started getting higher and the money was worth less. So Diocletian invented a kind of coin called the solidus, which is solid gold, hence the name. And this was supposed to be a dependable currency. One of the things that Diocletian was using it for was to pay his soldiers with, because the soldiers had not been getting as much pay as they should have gotten, or at least they got the amount of pay that they're supposed to get, but it was worth less. So Diocletian was paying his soldiers with the solidus, which is where we get the word soldiers, in fact. The Latin word is milites, from which we get the word militia. But the word soldier that we use today is derived from the solidus that Diocletian used to pay his soldiers. Other things that he tried to do in order to fix the situation were to fix maximum prices for things. Today, we think of prices as being determined by the law of supply and demand, the free market economy, as I indicate here. But back in those days, they didn't have that feeling about things. They said that there was a price that something was worth, and if you were charging more than that thing was worth, you were cheating the customer. So Diocletian made a list of things, all the different necessities of life, and then determined the highest price that could be charged for those, which in theory was a good idea, but of course he couldn't be everywhere and control everything. So if you went into a store and the guy charged you 4 gold pieces and you said, "Well, according to the edict of document prices, you're only supposed to charge me 3 gold pieces," and he would say, "Yeah, take it or leave it. You want this, you're going to give me 4 gold pieces." So it was a good idea in principle, but it didn't really work out very well. Another thing that Diocletian did, which had far-reaching consequences before what he realized they were, was that he decided that the empire had become too big for just one person to rule. So he devised a system which has been known as the tetrarchy, which is 4 people. Tetra is the Latin word for 4, which would be 2 emperors plus 2 assistant emperors, what we might call the equivalent of a vice president. Each of these 4 people was to rule over a different part of the empire. But the idea was that when the 2 emperors retired, the 2 assistant emperors would move into their place, and they in turn would select 2 other assistant emperors to help them. And that would avoid things like violent overthrow of the government, which had been happening all too much lately. It's a good idea in principle, but again, people didn't follow through. When Diocletian retired, which he eventually did, he actually died peacefully, which was not common for emperors in those days. When Diocletian retired, all the other people wanted to be the guy in sole control. So they had another civil war, and they were fighting it out. That was not at all what Diocletian had in mind. The person who comes out from this civil war as the victor is the next real emperor named Constantine. Constantine was interesting, most importantly, because he was interesting in the history of the Christian church. Diocletian had persecuted the Christians. He had thought that the Christians were not honoring the emperor. This was the old story of, you're not praying to the emperor's genius, and therefore you're being seditious and unpatriotic. But Constantine had a more positive attitude towards Christianity, probably because his mother was a Christian. And so he knew at least one Christian quite well. And it's interesting because we're never quite sure during Constantine's life what it is that he really thinks of Christianity, but he at least determines that it's politically useful to him. And this all begins to take shape during the climactic battle of the Civil War, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in Rome. Constantine wins this battle, and that's basically why he ends up becoming the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. Before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he has a vision or dream. It's different sources give you different concepts. And in this dream, he sees in the sky a big sign. And the words are either spoken or written around it, in hoc signo vinces, which is the Latin for, in this sign you will conquer. This has since become a Christian symbol, and also in many churches you will see, as part of the church decorations, the letters IHS, which stand for in hoc signo, in this sign. The symbol that he sees with these words around it has become known as the Chi Rho. It is one way of interpreting the symbol is that the X is the Greek letter Chi, or K, and the rest of the symbol is the Greek letter Rho, which is R, and therefore you can say it's K, and then you fill in Christ, and so this is a symbol of Christ. And it's become known as the Chi Rho, and this is another one of the symbols that you often see in a Christian church. So when he wakes up from the dream, or he ends the vision, he says, I'm going to have my soldiers, all of them are going to put this Chi Rho symbol on the fronts of their shields. And the soldiers do that, and they win the battle. Now, it's quite possible that a lot of these soldiers thought that what they were actually putting on their shields was a symbol for the sun god. There was, back in those days, a cult of Sol Invictus, or the victorious sun. And the symbol, as you can see, is very much like the symbol that Constantine saw in his dream. But Constantine chooses to interpret this symbol that he saw in his dream as a symbol of Christianity. Now, he doesn't actually become Christian. He doesn't become baptized as a Christian until on his deathbed. But he immediately starts becoming more publicly sympathetic to Christians. Remember, up until this day, it had been illegal to be a Christian. But the next day, not the next day, the next year, after he has this successful battle, he, as the new emperor of the Roman Empire, he issues something called the Edict of Milan, which specifically says, don't pick on Christians. They're nice people. They deserve to be able to be Christians. You sometimes see this as a symbol of, as an announcement of religious toleration in general, but you actually still had to believe in a God. It wasn't that any kind of religion was acceptable, but the Edict of Milan does specifically say that Christians are okay. We can't persecute Christians anymore. Now, the reason, I have motivation with a question mark, and the reason is that there could have been several reasons that Constantine decided this was a good idea. For one thing, when Diocletian had been persecuting the Christians, it caused division in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was already having problems enough. Diocletian thought he would be able to unify people under the emperor, but that wasn't working so well. So Constantine said, if I can unify people under Christianity, if I can bring them all together as Christians and solve problems that way, then that might be an effective way of dealing with it. So if you can't beat them, join them. Instead of becoming a persecutor of Christians, the way Diocletian was, Constantine becomes a supporter of Christians. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he himself is a Christian, and it doesn't mean that Christianity has become the official religion of the empire. It's just, now it's possible to worship pagan gods if you want to worship pagan gods, but it's also possible to worship Christians if you want to worship Christians, and you can kind of take your choice. Later on, by the end of the 4th century, it does become necessary to be a Christian. It becomes the official policy of the Roman Empire to be a Christian. Constantine makes some other interesting changes too. One of the things that he does, which is a departure from the old Roman Empire, is he moves the capital. The capital, of course, had been at Rome. This is why it is called the Roman Empire. But Constantine decides that he is going to have his capital at a place between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, in the area which is today the nation of modern Turkey. There had been a city called Byzantium, which was located on the Hellespont Straits, between the European side of Turkey and the Asian side of Turkey. He selects that city, Byzantium, as his capital. And after his death, it becomes known as Constantinople and becomes a very important, it is in fact the most important city in the Roman Empire. Today, we call that city Istanbul. So there are 3 different names. It is Byzantium, according to the old style. Then during the 4th century, it becomes Constantinople. And then when it falls to the Muslims in the 1400s, they changed the name to Istanbul, which in Turkish means basically big city. So Byzantium, Constantinople, and Istanbul are all the same city. Now, later on, actually, at the end of the 400s, the 3rd century, the 300s, the 4th century, a later emperor, later than Constantine, Emperor Theodosius, splits the empire in 2. There actually become 2 emperors and 2 different halves of the Roman Empire. This is not quite the same division as Diocletian had made when he divided the empire into 4 and gave either an emperor or a vice emperor jurisdiction over a section of it. But the idea was that it was still going to be one big empire. It was just going to have 2 administrative divisions. But it doesn't work out that way. There is, for one thing, in the Western Empire, they moved the capital also. Rome has become a very rundown place, difficult to rule, and the emperor who follows Theodosius in the West, his son Honorius, moves the capital from Rome to Ravenna. So although it is still called a Roman Empire, none of the administration of the empire is being done from Rome anymore. It's Ravenna in the west and Constantinople in the east. And these two sides of the empire basically become two separate countries. They're supposed to be working together, but there's actually very little communication between the two. And the Western Empire, as we shall see, falls apart. It's no longer one big nation anymore. It's a bunch of smaller nations. In the East, the empire continues to exist. And in fact, the people in the East still continue to talk about themselves as Romans, even though there's no connection with Rome anymore, because they see the Eastern Empire as a continuation of the Roman Empire. But to us today, historians of today, it's confusing to refer to it as the Roman Empire, because the eastern half of the Roman Empire that survives this division is actually very different from what we talk about when we talk about the Roman Empire. So we have come into a different way of talking about it. We refer to this eastern half, after it has split and separated from the western half, as the Byzantine Empire. Now, you might ask, why are we calling it the Byzantine Empire when the people who lived there called themselves Romans, and for that matter, had changed the name of the city to Constantinople? Well, as I said, it's too confusing to refer to it as the Roman Empire when it's so different from what the Roman Empire had been. And if you go around referring to the Constantinopolitan Empire, you're going to use that valuable time that you could better be using, creating world peace and things like that. I'm going to take a little break now and come back in a moment to continue the lecture. See you there then. Bye.